Okay, well, it looks like it's 7 o'clock and my name's Mavis Souls. I'm president of Lane County Audubon Society. We're really happy to be able to welcome folks for this special program where we're cooperating with Rogue Valley Audubon as well and having a speaker who's, I think, currently in California. So we're very excited about that. I also want to thank Dennis for putting all of this together because he's read the book, he's been promoting it, and so Dennis is the mover, the shaker that made it all happen. And so I won't belabor any of this anymore, but I'd like to offer a couple minutes for Rebecca to welcome her Audubon chapter as well.
Thank you. I'm Rebecca. I'm the current interim president for the Rogue Valley Audubon Society. Also super excited that we could do this partnership talk. It's fun and I hope we get to do more in the future. Quick announcements are just, we're looking for more board members if you're interested. And if you haven't had enough after tonight of bird talking, this Saturday, the keynote speaker for the conservation celebration at Southern Oregon Land Conservancy is going to be Dr. Susan Haig, who is a co-author on the book As the Condor Soars. So if you want to go to more bird talks this week, another one will be in Ashland. That's all.
You're up, Noah.
Okay, well, hello everyone. I was just going through all the faces here, and it's nice to see some familiar faces. I'm actually zooming in from Quebec City of all places, so I'm 3 hours ahead of you. But I couldn't resist because Dennis invited me to introduce our speaker for tonight's meeting, who is someone that I really admire and have followed over the years, and I'm sure some of you have as well. And it's kind of special for me because as a fellow big year birder, I feel like we are in this tradition that started way back in the days of Roger Tory Peterson doing a big road trip in the 50s, and then big years with people like Ken Kaufman coming along in the 70s. And now people are taking big years in all these new and interesting directions. And in 2014, we all became aware of this crazy guy who was riding his bicycle all the way around North America trying to spot birds, which was such a bold idea that we couldn't help but start following his blog. And what kept us reading along in the end was just the sheer enthusiasm and raw telling of this story from the road day by day of biking around the entire continent looking for birds, which as far as I know has never been done since and may never be done again. And so Dorian Anderson was firmly on the map, and then he's gone on to do international birding, which is near and dear to my soul, so I'm happy to see that, and other projects. And then last year, 2023, he came out with this book, Birding Under the Influence, and I read it, and I think like a lot of people, I realized that his story was actually a lot deeper than even I knew reading along on his Biking for Birds blog in 2014. So I'm not going to say any more because I think he'll tell all about it. And I'd like to introduce Dorian. Take it away.
Thank you for that, Noah. That was a great intro. And hopefully we will cross paths physically again soon. Probably not in Quebec City, but possibly somewhere on the West Coast here. I am going to try to, I don't know if you guys can still see me. If you can't, that's no real loss. But yeah, I'm going to tell you about this bicycle big year, which I can't believe is now 10 years kind of in my rear view. And as Noah referenced, like when I wrote the blog was a lot about this is what happened today. This is what went right. This is what went wrong. And as a result of those ups and downs, this is what needs to happen tomorrow. But I didn't really get into the personal backstory. And a whole bunch of what I'm going to tell you at the outset today touches on that, because I think that will help you understand not only me as a human being, but also the mind of an addict and how that manifests itself in the form of something like birding. So this is the title of the talk, as is the book, is called Birding Under the Influence, and it's basically the story of how I went from birds to booze and back again. So let's see. There, that's me. So I started birding in my backyard in Philadelphia at age 7. My parents are the two most indoorsy people around. They had no interest in birding. They had no interest in the out of doors. And my mom was in the same gardening group as Peg Ridgely, who is married to Robert Ridgely of kind of Academy of Natural Sciences, Birds of Ecuador, Hokotoko Foundation, Birds of South America fame. And so my mom is lamenting. She's like, I've got this bird obsessed kid and I don't know what to do with them. And Peg is lamenting. She's like, I've got this bird obsessed husband and I don't know what to do with him. So bang, they arranged that the two of us started hanging out on the weekends when I was still in Philadelphia. So that probably started when I was like 10, 11, 12, kind of in that area. And Robert suggested that I attend some of these youth camps run by Victor Emanuel, who has since become a very near and dear friend. But I think I'm still the youngest person ever to attend event camp. I went when I was 12. I was such a little pinhead. This is actually me at age 12, complete with like old school binoculars, braces, the whole 9 yards. So I did a bunch of event camps, and that kind of introduced me to other young birders and made me feel a little bit less of an outcast because I didn't know too many young birders around Philadelphia. And kind of by age 15, I thought I wanted to be an ornithologist. I heard Robert's stories of discovering species in South America, his stories about how to make that translate into conservation projects. And I thought, wow, this would be a really cool way to put my interest to work and make a living doing this. And for reasons that I touch on in the book, and I might get to at some point today, I moved away from that dream for a couple of different discrete reasons. But this is my academic trajectory. And so I stayed in day school, kind of where I grew up in Philly, until I was 14. And then I decided to go to prep school. So I went to one of these like Dead Poet Society, Scent of a Woman type old school New England prep school. So I went to Hotchkiss in Northwestern Connecticut. And I left Hotchkiss, and then I went to Stanford, where I did a BS in biochemistry and molecular biology. And then I wanted some additional research experience. And honestly, I wanted to go live in Boston for a few years. So I sorted it out so that I could be a research assistant at Harvard. And there I worked on molecular embryology. So effectively, I studied what are the molecular asymmetries in the embryo that decide where the embryo is going to put its head and where it's going to put its feet. And with that decision, its left side and its right side and its dorsal and ventral sides. And so that really kind of emboldened me in the field of developmental biology. And so I wanted to understand how, from an intrinsic genetic blueprint, an organism is built. So I went and did a PhD in developmental genetics and molecular cell biology at NYU. And I worked on cell polarity, which is a really fundamental cellular process. And very briefly, cell polarity is the process through which cells regionalize cell function. So an intestinal cell, for instance, is polarized. And so what it does is it absorbs food on one side from the intestinal lumen, and then passes those nutrients across its cell body and then dumps them into the bloodstream on the other side. So there's a directionality of function. The light that's hitting your retinal cells is hitting one side of the cell and being transduced into an electrochemical signal in the form of an axon, and then sent into your visual cortex and a part of your brain that interprets what you're seeing. So all these cells have like a directionality of function, and how that axis of asymmetric function is established is conserved through evolution, and it's super interesting. So I just fell like into this rabbit hole during my PhD of learning how cells polarize. But in the background of all this was my current substance abuse problem. So I discovered alcohol when I was 17 years old. I kind of like resisted the peer pressure for a while, but when my friends laid off, I actually picked up. And so did some infrequent binge drinking at Hotchkiss. I couldn't get wrecked on campus because you get kicked out. There was a no chance policy for alcohol or drugs. So that kind of kept me in check there. When I got to Stanford, Hotchkiss had prepared me really well. So academically, it wasn't too bad at the outset. And so I got into a pattern of just constant blackout drinking. Every time I went out, I was blacking out, not remembering what I was saying and doing. I didn't cause problems, but it just was not the healthiest situation. I started experimenting more with drugs, lots of marijuana, ecstasy, mushrooms, so on and so forth. And then once I got to the big city in the form of Boston, it was kind of an escalation where what was kind of occasional hard drug use became weekly hard drug use. I was DJing, I was working in nightclubs, I was hanging out at raves. I was basically doing all the shady stuff that you don't want your kids or grandkids doing. And I actually chose NYU because it was in the biggest party in the world, that being New York City, Manhattan. And so once I got there, my drug use just exploded. And what was weekend ecstasy and cocaine became midweek ecstasy and cocaine, or midweek ketamine, or midweek meth. And so I was just very good at school and had a lot of energy, and so I could juggle the two aspects. I was kind of living this double life through those years. And it seems very strange to kind of hand wave away what is arguably the most important kind of decision or tack that I've taken in my life, which is getting sober. Hopefully, you if you haven't read about that, you will read about it in my book. But just to summarize, I got sober in my last year of graduate school at NYU, which was in January of 2010. So I'd had like a 13 or 14-year run of drugs and alcohol at that stage. And it's kind of once an addict, always an addict. And so my birding interest reemerged in that alcohol vacuum. I don't necessarily have a choice. What I've learned is that I don't have a choice about being an addict, but I do have a choice as to what I'm addicted. And so I didn't realize this at the moment, but my birding interest kind of came back full force and filled the void that was left when I put alcohol and drugs down. And I knew that I had a problem. I'm a geneticist. I can look at my family and I could see that there was alcoholism on both sides of my family. And my behavior was just deteriorating rapidly. And so fortunately, as I said, I was good at school, and I started a postdoctoral fellowship at Mass General Hospital and Harvard Medical School in January of 2011. So graduate school still went really well, despite what I did to myself for the first 5 of the 6 years. And so my postdoctoral research focused on synapse remodeling. And so I was specifically interested in how over developmental time neurons modify their patterns of contact with one another and thereby change the information flow through the circuit. So, for instance, schizophrenia is thought to be a defect in synapse remodeling, so that you don't prune the appropriate number of synapses from the circuit. And as a result, the circuit is overactive, which accounts for voices being heard and hallucinations being experienced. So that's one hypothesis, though we don't know that for sure. And so this project was super interesting. I was working in this little model, this worm called C. elegans, which has a really stripped down nervous system. And the project looked really promising when I picked it up. I figured this would be like 3 or 4 years. I could develop this into a project that I could publish and then take back to a place like Stanford, Harvard, NYU. I'd open my own lab as a professor. The problem is that there's a reason that it's called research, and it's never as smooth as you think it's going to be. And so in kind of delving into this project, I found out that some of the assumptions that were made before I arrived were incorrect. The assays were a lot more sensitive than I realized, and it was very difficult to see the signal in the noise of kind of like background noise. There were a lot of technical difficulties. I spent so much time optimizing assays. A lot of my experiments are uninformative. In one run, it would implicate gene A and not gene B. And the next run, it would say A is not involved and gene B is. So I had all this conflicting data, and I didn't know how to sort through this. And so I had built this like big fear of failure. I had articulated this goal of being a college professor, even through all the drinking. Like that's what I wanted to do. And I thought that academia would tolerate my nonsense as long as I could publish papers and bring in grant money. And I was good at that for the time that I was doing it. But once I got sober, I experienced a much bigger fear of failure, in that like I had this singular goal of being a professor. And if I didn't reach that, then what was my life worth? And I also didn't have alcohol and drugs as like a self-handicapping mechanism anymore. I could always point to that and being like, well, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I have this like crutch that I'm leaning on that prevents me from ever finding out if I could be the smartest guy in the room. And so I built up this kind of house of cards of ego and expectations, both internal and external. And so I was really lost kind of towards the second year, to the end of the second year of my postdoctoral fellowship. And I'd surrendered my identity once when I got sober. I went from being the DJ fun party guy that anybody could call any night of the week to go out and have a good time to kind of a social nobody. And I wasn't sure I was willing to surrender my identity in the form of like professional achievement in the same manner. So there was a lot going on inside my head at this stage, and I really had no idea how I was going to reconcile all of this. That's until, I guess this is kind of appropriate given what just happened in the southeastern U.S., but this is when Superstorm Sandy swept up the East Coast. It was October of 2012. Like I said, I was towards the end of my second postdoctoral year. I started my postdoc in January of 2010. And the storm was really big. It wasn't that powerful, but its wind field stretched all the way east to Scandinavia. And so it ended up capturing two northern lapwings and dropped them on Nantucket. Nantucket is this offshore island. It's about 25 miles off the coast of Massachusetts. It's like a summer retreat for well-to-dos, great fishing, beautiful place. And so I got the word of these lapwings 2 days after the hurricane went through, and my ABA listing bug had come back, and I was like, I have to go see these lapwings. But this would require a bit of coordination. So you can see where I was in Boston. I was actually in Cambridge at the time. So what I figured out that I could do is drive to Hyannis and then I could get on the ferry and then ride that 2.5 hours to Nantucket. The problem with Nantucket is that it shuts down after Labor Day. The island taxi service is closed, and there wasn't an easy way for me to get from the dock to the area where the birds had been seen. And so just on a whim, I called a local bike shop and asked, hey, could I rent a bike from you? And the guy's like, if you're crazy enough to come out here in the wake of a hurricane and pay $35 for the bike, you can ride it wherever the hell you want, do whatever the hell you want with it, as long as you bring it back. So that's exactly what I did. I drove from Boston to Hyannis. I hopped on the ferry, and then I rented the bike, which is 2 blocks from the dock. And then I rode out to this deserted marsh, and there they were, two northern lapwings. So that was an ABA bird at that time. I'd actually seen the bird in the UK. My dad is English, so I used to spend a lot of time in the UK as a kid when I was doing more birding. So I biked out there in the pouring rain. It was probably 45 degrees, pouring rain. It stopped long enough that I could take out the camera and take some pictures of the birds. And then it started to rain again after about an hour, and I packed everything up, got back on the bike. I was pedaling with a 500 millimeter lens, so the bag that I had like 20 pounds of gear in the backpack. But I rode back to the dock, got on the ferry, and I'm riding back on the ferry, and I'm thinking, wow, that bird pursuit, that bird chase felt a lot different than any other bird chase that I've done before. And that I realized was because of the bicycle. It was very different to invest what I call some of myself into the birds in a physical manner rather than just like driving to go see them. And so this kind of kicked off this cascade in my head where I was wondering, are there bike birding trips? Are there bike birding clubs? Is there any formalized precedent for bike birding? And most interestingly, has anybody done a bicycle big year? And I was just like, that would be the coolest project ever. And so let me preface this with what is a big year? I think that most people know this, especially if you guys are friends with NOAA. But the idea is it's a treasure hunt, an avian treasure hunt that lasts through a calendar year, so January 1st to December 31st. This most often unfolds in the US, kind of like Alaska, Canada, and in the lower 48. And competitors end up using planes, cars, boats to move around and to cover as much ground as quickly as possible and see the most species. Some competitors will drive 50,000 miles and fly another 200,000. And when this idea popped into my head in 2012, top finishers approached 750 species, at least in the North American or ABA Big Year. And then this book, The Big Year, came out in 1998 and was made into a movie in 2011. And this was fortuitous for me because once I got onto America's roads, the fact that this movie was kind of out in circulation familiarized the American public with birding in a way that before this movie, the public wasn't familiar. So people would ask me what the hell I'm doing on the bike riding through town X. And I'd say, well, I'm riding my bike around the country looking for birds, trying to see how many species I can see in a year. And people would say, oh, like that silly movie that came out. And I'd be like, yes, exactly like the movie, except I'm on a bike. And so this was a nice like primer for the American public, and it made communicating with them a bit easier 3 years in its aftermath. And so I think a lot of birders dream about doing a big year. I think they're awesome. Big years are awesome projects, especially it's like as a retirement gift to yourself. You spend a whole year birding after 30 years of working or whatever. But I did identify what I thought were two kind of problems. I would even call them like fatal flaws with the existing big year model specifically as it pertains to the ABA area. And the first is that it's not a birding contest. It's a travel contest. And he or she with the most money is necessarily going to win the travel contest because they can get to more remote places. They can hire guides. So while the pursuit is definitely worthwhile, the competition aspect of it is rigged, and there's no mystery who's going to win. And the other issue is that it burns up a ton of fossil fuel. And while no one birder flying even 200 flights a year is going to be responsible for the downfall of the polar ice caps, I thought it was inconsistent for the community to champion those among us who unquestionably have the biggest carbon footprints. So these are the two problems that I set to like reconciling in my own head. And I realized that if I could reinvent the big year using a bicycle, it would solve for both of those problems, because no matter how much money I had in the bank, which as a postdoc wasn't very much, that money wouldn't turn the pedals for me. And all of my carbon emissions would be metabolic. So it would be a fraction of what people would generate with planes, trains, automobiles, and so on and so forth. So that was my goal. That was kind of what I decided to kind of wrap my head around. And this actually, I drew this as a joke. This was probably drawn in the winter, like a couple of months after this idea popped into my head. For reasons you will read about, I was not ready to take the plunge at the end of 2012. Like for me to get out of science was going to require months of tying up loose ends, handing off projects. So that just wouldn't. I could not have left in at the end of 2012 for a big year in 2013 without burning every bridge that I had built to that stage professionally. So I kind of punted. But in that time, as I was thinking about maybe doing this in 2014, I drew this map as a joke as to this would be the route that I would ride that I think would enable me to get to 600 species. And it was very complicated to sit down and figure out where and I needed to be at what times of the year. And I realized I had to either start in the Northeast or end in the Northeast if I had any shot at getting to 600 species. And fortuitously, the riding calculation suggested that I start in the Northeast in January. So I got to start close to my Boston home at that stage. So just remember this route. I'll come back to it throughout the talk. Sorry, you'll see a couple references to the UK pop up. I gave this talk at Bird Fair earlier this year, and my subscription to PowerPoint is expired, and I can't take slides out. So you're going to see a couple comparisons to the UK throughout this. Just know that I do realize I'm talking to people in Oregon. And this is really important. My cycling experience to this point, this slide represents it. I rode my bike blacked out drunk to and from frat parties at Stanford, and then the ride, the 5 miles to the Lapwing and the 5 miles back after Hurricane Sandy. That represents my cycling experience. So this was going to be a big leap for me to undertake this project. But I decided to take the plunge. I abandoned my career, which is like arguably as hard and as emotional a decision as was getting sober. I didn't even own a bike at the stage, so I bought a bike. And I figured I'd figure it all out as I went along. And so this is how the adventure started. And I needed this adventure as a way I hadn't done a lot of thinking about what I wanted out of my life while I was drinking. And while I was entrenched in science, like I had this very myopic, linear view of success and happiness. And so with a lot of convincing from my wife, my then girlfriend and now wife, like she was instrumental in saying, like, you need to do this and you need to do this now, and I'll wait for you while you do it. So the story of her influence over me and her support is a big part of the book. So this is what it looked like. I started about 40 miles north of Boston on January 1st, 2014. Started out the first day, it was 10 degrees when I got on the bike, and the day topped out at 27 degrees. So it was cold. And that's me biking kind of midday when a friend took that photo. But my first bird of the year was actually a snowy owl. I biked out to this marsh before sunrise, hoping to see short-eared owl. And as I was biking out there, a snowy owl flew across my path. Now, this is not the snowy owl that flew across my path. This is the sixth or seventh one I saw that day. 2013, 2014 was the biggest snowy owl invasion on record in the Northeast. That's the year that the bird made it that one representative made it to Jacksonville, Florida. They were like on billboards in North Atlanta, in the mid-Atlantic. They were like landing on people's barbecues in New England and things. So I knew I would get snowy owl on my first day, but to get it as my first bird, my first species, was pretty incredible. So that was the first individual bird that I saw. The second individual bird that I saw was a snowy owl as well. The third individual bird I saw was this short-eared owl that the second snowy owl was chasing. And the fourth individual bird was a bald eagle. So I'm not sure it would be possible to have a better start to any big year, let alone a self-powered big year than what I experienced. A few hours after that, I was scanning through Bonaparte's gulls on the jetty. And this bird flew through my field of view, and I immediately recognized it as a black-headed gull. And this was super cool because it was self-found, and a whole bunch of people had come out to kind of cheer me on. And it was really nice to be able to share this bird with all of them, because everybody was going to work really hard across the year to help share birds with me. So it felt good to pay it forward right out of the gate. And I promise you, I'm not going to take you through all 365 days, but the beginning of this adventure was so ridiculous that it is worth spending a bit of time going through what happened in the Northeast. So I took this screenshot of the weather forecast for my blog, and I knew at some point like I'd be able to, if I survived, it didn't freeze to death, I'd have a pretty good story to tell. And you can see that it's predicting the temperature to fall to well below freezing and actually into negative. And if you add up the snowfall total here, it's about 10 inches. Well, that was wrong. We ended up getting 18 inches of snow. So this is me on January 2nd. I tried to walk down to the beach to do a sea watch, and my eyes froze shut. It was just too much wind, too much snow. It was awful. 25-mile-an-hour winds. This is just as it's getting going. I was housebound for the rest of the second and all day on the third. And then when I got going again on the fourth, it was 10 degrees below zero. But I rode into this winter wonderland that I doubt any birder prior to me had experienced. I'm riding along. I mean, Massachusetts fortunately knows how to deal with this amount of snow. So the roads were clear, but I'm cruising along and there's wild turkeys running across the road. There's cedar waxwing flocks like swirling above the trees. And I'm out there all by myself, bundled to the nines, riding through this winter wonderland. It was absolutely magical, and I have not experienced anything quite as cool, no pun intended, since. So it was pretty amazing experience. These were my northeastern target birds. This was going to be the model on which I kind of like, this was going to be the prototype in which I modeled the rest of the big year. My family lived in Philly, and I figured that if I realized by Philadelphia I had made some catastrophic mistake, I could pull into port there and like regroup and figure out an alternative plan. But I did really well in the Northeast. I got birds like dovekey, thick-billed murre that are hard to get from boats in the Northeast in the winter. Things like rusty blackbird, snow bunting, kind of the usual waterfowl. It was great to get king eider in Gloucester, Massachusetts. It wasn't a good finch year, so the crossbill, white-winged crossbill and common redpoll weren't around, but I was able to get barnacle goose. Black-legged kittiwake was arguably my worst miss of the entire year. Every time I went to go look for that bird, it was snowing and I couldn't see but 100 yards out to sea. And that's a bird that if you sea watch, you can get pretty easily in New England and Long Island and places like that. And I also missed little gull, but I'll come back to that at the end. What you can see here is that I ended up riding through more snow in Philadelphia, in Delaware. And it was still freezing when I got to the White House. It was like 15 degrees when I went through DC. I suffered 4 or 5 snowstorms in that first 30 days or so. A couple of those snowstorms dropped upwards of a foot or more. And in some ways, this was a blessing in disguise, because as an alcoholic addict, I don't have the ability to impose limits on myself. And so Mother Nature assumed that responsibility for me. And I think that being forced, like I wasn't able to stay on the bike all day because it was so cold. And I just there's so much snow that I was forced off the roads a number of days. I think that helped me moderate at the beginning of the year and avoid burnout later. So in some ways, the fact that this was the coldest, like the coldest January and February on record in the Northeastern US helped me more than hurt me, even though it was incredibly painful to cycle through it in the moment. So I moved down the eastern seaboard. I went through Virginia, I did North Carolina, and did South Carolina, and like birding on the beach in South Carolina was great, like around Charleston, Sullivan's Island, seeing piping plover and wintering red knots and black skimmers. And the species list really started to climb as I moved south. And then Florida was just a godsend after what I survived in the Northeast. And so got my lifer snail kite, which is pretty cool because I'd missed it on two previous trips to Florida, and it's kind of a conservation success story at this stage. There's a lot of big, slow, colorful, and approachable birds, things like purple gallinule, roseate spoonbill, white ibis. All these birds are just accustomed to people at places like the Wakotahachie wetlands and the Green Cay wetlands. So it was wonderful walking around those with my camera in shorts and a t-shirt and sandals after being bundled up for such a huge portion of the beginning of the year. And this Lasagras flycatcher was cool because this was one of the last birds that Neil Hayward got on his record-breaking 2013 ABA big year when he broke Sandy Comito's 1998 record. The bird stayed through the winter, and then I was able to see the exact same bird in March. which is kind of cool because Neil and I were friends when we lived in Boston. We shared the Boston connection. So it was kind of a nice, a fitting connection for the two of us to share that bird. So as I just told you, I moved down the eastern seaboard. I spent a lot of time in Florida. I think I was in Florida for almost 6 weeks when it was all said and done. And most of that portion of the journey, January, February, March, wasn't terribly time sensitive. Wintering populations of birds tend to be relatively sedentary, and while individual birds certainly move around, the population as a whole is static. There's like a net, there's no net exchange with other areas. But once you hit spring migration, populations become much more dynamic. And so I realized that I had to be on the upper Texas coast in the middle of April without fail. And so I kind of set an arrival goal of April 15th. And given that I suffered all those storms in the Northeast, I had zero cycling experience. I got hit by a car in Florida. I almost got run off the roads by a bunch of crazy jackasses when I was in the Carolinas. I suffered a whole bunch of flat tires going through Louisiana, which had by far the worst roads in the country. It was a miracle that I made it to Texas on April 13th. And a big storm came through on the 15th, and that was the only like weather event of that entire spring, and I was there for it. So I was able to get a whole bunch of the trans-Gulf migrants on basically my second day there, including black-throated blue warbler, which is usually an eastern Gulf migrant. It usually migrates up through Florida and then disperses into the eastern half of the country from there. But I found this bird. I was riding along at like 15 miles an hour near Sabine Woods, and I just went by this little thicket, and I'm like, that looked like a black-throated blue warbler. And so I doubled back, and I was able to ID it and get a picture. And then I rode, since everybody had been so cool the whole year, I rode the 5 miles back to Sabine Woods and told everybody there that I just found this black-throated blue down the street, and it hung in there the whole day. So everybody who wanted to go and see it was able to, which is really cool. So it was always really nice to be able to share birds with folks because so many people were helping me find birds as I went along. Same day I was able to get Swainson's warblers. That storm was just a gold mine. It delivered so many of the birds that I needed to find in Texas right out of the gate. I spent the remaining time, the remaining like 10 days kind of bouncing around High Island, all the usual spots, Bolivar Peninsula, Fort Travis, Anahuac, so on and so forth. And I cleaned up. I got all the things I needed to get there. And then looking at what was ahead, I started to worry a little bit. To this point in the trip to the Texas coast, I had been on the coast basically the entire time, where there's good infrastructure, things are developed, it's easy to find places to stay, it's easy to find places to eat, it's easy to find water. But as I would move west, and specifically west of Austin, this would change. It's very remote. Food, water, and shelter are very few and far between in the wilds of western Texas. The towns are spaced anywhere from 35 to 80 miles, and you have to know when you leave town A that you can make it to town B, because there is nothing. There's absolutely nothing in between. So if you get 30 miles into the ride and you're like, I'm not feeling it today, you have no choice but to turn around and ride right back to where you started. It was going to be hot. Western Texas, granted, it's at a bit of elevation, but the warm wind coming from the southwest brings up this Mexican air. So you're looking at days 90 to 100 degrees in the afternoon. And even though the wind on the Gulf Coast comes from the southeast, once you move west of Austin, the wind comes from the west, specifically the southwest. And so riding into headwinds is like the most maddening thing that a person can imagine. It's just absolutely awful. And so to combat this, I started my rides at like 4:35 in the morning. So I'd be riding along Interstate 10, which is the fastest way across the state, in the pitch black as cars are tearing by me at 80 miles an hour. But it was the only way that I could combat the heat and the wind, because those two are usually absent early in the day. So the goal was to get on the road and get to where I was going by noon, and then hunker down so that I didn't die of thirst or heat exhaustion as I went along. But I survived Texas. I got across southern New Mexico, and then I got to Arizona. And my first day in Arizona, I think I had 27 or 28 year birds, which was the most number of new birds I had on any single day of the big year, except day one when everything was new. So as soon as I got to Arizona, the struggles to get across Texas were worth it. I had all the usual birds, blue-throated mountain gem, as it's called now, Rivoli's hummingbird. I got common blackhawk, which was a bird I wasn't exactly sure where I was going to get, but I had this fly over my head about 10 minutes after I saw Montezuma quail. with the help of Ron Beck, actually a bike birder who had done a Cochise County big year the year before. He and I got along really well. You'll read about him in the book. He's a really interesting character. He helped me find Rufous-capped warbler in Hunter Canyon, and the hits in Arizona just kept coming. I was able to get white-eared hummingbird, black-capped gnatcatcher. I heard buff-colored nightjar at Madeira Canyon, and it just everything was falling into place. And so 5 months in, by May 31st, I'd found 459 species. So I had found 75% of the species that I was hoping to find in 5 months, which isn't, it was way ahead of where I thought it would be, but I knew that the second half of the year, because of diminishing returns, I'd have to invest a lot more effort and sanity per species than I did in the first part of the year. But by this stage of the year, I could not have imagined that I'd be doing as well as I was. Was a cool ride. So I left like southeastern Arizona and I rode Interstate 17 like north from Phoenix to Flagstaff, and then I started to go into Navajo Nation through funky towns like Tuba City and Kayenta, and then from Kayenta I cut into southeastern Utah, and so I went through Monument Valley, and I thought this was a cool place. So I flagged somebody down on the side of the road and had them take this picture, and then in the course of like putting together talks and thinking about this, I realized that there was a similar scene in Forrest Gump where Forrest is doing his running back and forth across the country routine, and he has this ragtag group of riffraff following him around. And so, as Noah alluded, my blog was really widely read, and it was great. It was not only a source through which I could update people on my progress, but it was also a pipeline through which people could communicate to me. And I got so many letters of encouragement and bird finding tips and housing offers and so on and so forth through that channel, that I felt a real responsibility to my blog readers and supporters to keep the adventure going. So when I had these rough days when I wanted to quit and I was like, what the hell am I doing? I threw my career away for this. I would remember my blog readers and the accountability that I had towards them, and much in the same way that Alcoholics Anonymous provides like a community to which you're accountable. My blog was that community. And so it was really awesome having all of those people metaphorically behind me as I was moving around the country. So now I just told you we're in southeastern Utah, and this is where the kind of Rocky Mountain phase of the journey begins. And I knew this would be challenging, but man, it was as beautiful as it was challenging. This is above Silverton. So I don't know if any of you guys have ridden that Durango to Silverton Railroad that climbs like 6,000 feet. I basically paralleled that steam engine from Durango to Silverton, and Silverton is kind of down that valley to the left. And then what I did on this day is I came up this valley, and you can see the road there on the right. This is Red Mountain Pass. And then from here, I dropped like 3,000 vertical feet into Uray. And that ride was absolutely spectacular. Like Colorado, just every time every ride was just unbelievable. It delivered at every turn. This was the highest I got the bike in the course of the whole year, 11,990 feet at Loveland Pass. And this white-tailed ptarmigan and brown-capped rosy finch gave me nightmares because they're in the alpine. They prefer the alpine zone, like above 12,000 feet or so. And so the nearest lodging to these places is 8,000 feet. And so I'd have to like gain, anytime I want to look for these birds, I'd have to spend 3 or 4 hours to gain the 3,000 or 4,000 feet up to where they live, where they spend their summers. I'd have to throw my bike into a stand of bushes or behind a snowdrift, and then put on my hiking boots and then go stomping around on the tundra looking for these birds that, like in the case of ptarmigan, really don't want to be found. So I did this like 6 or 7 times, just coming up empty every time, until finally at Guanella Pass, I almost stepped on this white-tailed ptarmigan. And to that point in the year, it was like my hardest fought birding victory. It was just unbelievably cool. And I was able to follow this bird around for about an hour. She was really, really accommodating. And then this guy, Chris Rurik, who was a blog reader, said, dude, you know what? I want to come birding with you. Why don't you go look for the ptarmigan, and then I'll bring my tent and we can camp just below tree line. And that way you don't have to drop like another 3,000 feet to town, and you can have 2 bites at the Alpine Apple with 1 ride. And so I found the ptarmigan on that first day, and he came out this day, that night. And then the following day, we actually climbed Mount Bierstadt, which is 14,060 feet high. So that's the highest I got myself, not the bike, in the course of that year. And we found brown-capped razorfinch right near the summit. And so that was super cool. This is an example where like a blog reader was like actively inserted himself into my year, and it was made all the difference. And he's a Stanford alum too, so we had some really good conversations about our time on the farm. But it was an awesome fortuitous connection, and those kind of things meant the world to me as I moved around the country. Um, a lot of northern Colorado and Utah looks like this. It's just fields of sage. Uh, During a petroleum powered big year, collecting the species, I should say collecting, it's the wrong word, observing Gunnison sage grouse, greater sage grouse, sharp-tailed grouse, greater prairie chicken, lesser prairie chicken is very easy. There are tours like the ones that I run for tropical birding that just take people there to do that in 5 or 6 days. You just drive up to each lek and the birds are right in front of you. You know where they're going to be. The problem is in the summer, those birds disperse into the habitat at exceptionally low densities. And so I had to walk so much sage looking for these various species. So these birds don't want to fly. They're heavy, clunky, inefficient. And so I'm walking through this sage, like I just like 5 miles out, 5 miles back each day, clapping my hands, whoo, whoo, hooting, making my presence as big as possible, because I knew the only way that I would see these birds was to flush them from the habitat. And so like each of these birds required like a multi-day battle as opposed to just like a drive up tick on a normal big year. And so this is my view of all of these game birds, with them flying away at high speed after I flushed them from this concealing habitat. That Gunnison sage grouse, there were 6 of them that I flushed, and this one only flew a short distance and then sat down. It's like the only grouse that I photographed on the ground. Greater prairie chicken is an incredible story. You can read about that. I was not able to get a photo of that bird as I flushed it like right before dark in Ray, Colorado. But yeah, that was my summer, was chasing all these grouse around. Let me see how we're doing on time here. Oh, good. All right. So I wasn't originally going to go to Washington. My original route, if you recall that map, I'll refresh your memory in a little while, had me going from Boise kind of across northern Oregon and then hitting the Oregon coast and then turning south. But I underestimated my cycling abilities and potential. And so I had extra time in hand. And so I kept expanding my route to go look for additional species. And so I realized that if I could get to the North Cascades, I'd have a crack at spruce grouse, I'd have a crack at boreal chickadee, and I'd be able to get a bird like short-billed gull, which I'd be moving south down the West Coast faster than they would. So I'd probably miss short-tailed gull, short-billed gull if I didn't get it in Washington where they're resident. I also thought I could get gray-crowned rosy finch on Mount Rainier. So I added an extra 700 miles of riding to go to the North Cascades. But I was able to get spruce grouse, and I got boreal chickadee, and I got gray-crowned rosy finch, and I got short-billed gull, and it also made getting marbled murrelet on the Sound, on Puget Sound, is super easy. Whereas like I didn't want to spend hours or days on end scanning for it along the Pacific coast once I got further south. So it was a lot of extra riding, but it netted me a whole bunch of species that I would have missed otherwise. It also got me slaty-backed gull, which over summered in Washington. So that extension was, the Washington extension was really productive. So you can see there, you can see in August, my original plan had me kind of going across central Washington, but I was able to go all the way to the Canadian border. And then once I got to Oregon, I actually, because I had 2 bouts, I went to Westport, Washington, then I came back into Oregon on 101 at Cannon Beach. So you guys will recognize Haystack Rock. This is beautiful. I was able to spend 2 days there in some of the mountains inland from here. I finally caught up with city grouse, which is a bird that I'd missed on several attempts prior to that. I got tufted puffin here. There were only a couple left. Most of them head out to sea kind of through August. But I saw 2 individuals, I guess in the first week of September when I showed up in Cannon Beach. The riding down coastal Oregon, I never really spent any time going through Newport and Florence and Banyan, I think it's called, and then down to Gold Beach was spectacular. It was just unbelievably beautiful and rugged, great riding. It's the best time of the year to be on the West Coast. Continued down through California, did the Redwoods, birded Eureka and Arcata up in Humboldt County, and then came down through Ukiah and Petaluma, and this is pretty cool. Actually, I rode my bike over the Golden Gate Bridge today. I rode 60 miles. I apologize if I sound a bit lethargic today, but I chased white wagtail 60 miles over the Golden Gate Bridge today. Well, it's 30 miles out, 30 miles back from my Bay Area bike list, which is now at 355 species. So I've kept up the bike birding thing since I've been back, but it was cool. It's fun to see this today that I realized I was just riding over that a few hours earlier today in pursuit of white wagtail, which I got. So super cool. That's kind of a really iconic span, and it really kind of solidified that I was in California and on the West Coast at that stage. Half Moon Bay, which is an area that's about, I don't know, an hour ride from my house now, delivered a bunch of different rarities, Pacific golden plover and red-throated pipit being the two most notable ones. And these two birds actually, I vacated the area and then received reports of them behind me and then turned around and rode back. And so I kept going over the same ground back and forth, but I was getting all the birds which I was turning around. So I just had this unbelievably like lucky streak. And I spend a lot of time in Half Moon Bay now. It's where I do a lot of pelagic birding with Alvaro Jaramillo and Alvaro's Adventures in the few fall weekends when I'm home these days. The California coast in the fall was just as great as the Oregon coast. It was just spectacular. There's a reason that every car commercial is filmed on that bridge over there because it's so stunningly beautiful. Southern California delivered as well. I was able to get yellow-green vireo in San Diego. I got ancient murrelet in San Diego in October, which is crazy. That's another bird that was not even on my radar because I figured I'd be moving south faster than it would. And they only get to Southern California in like January, February, if they're going to get there at all. So for one to show up in October was crazy. Same thing with Thayer's gull, rest in peace, now lumped in with Iceland gull. I didn't think I had a shot in hell at that bird, but there was one at the Salton Sea. So that worked out nicely. So Southern California really delivered as well. This is probably the most ridiculous birding story that I have. And I was birding at the Salton Sea, and a friend, an acquaintance, called me and said, "Hey, I got your number from so-and-so, and I know what you're doing. I just found a rufous-backed robin in 29 palms. That's this area that's labeled 73950 in Ave." And I said, "That's great. Thank you for the call, but it's just too far. I don't want to chase that bird. It's the exact opposite direction that I'm going." I was headed southeast into Arizona at that stage, and so going back northwest didn't make any sense. So I spent the following day birding at the Salton Sea as well and got yellow-footed gull. And my phone rang again, and the message this time was the bird is still here. And so I now had 2 data points, and the important piece of information is that the bird, which is usually endemic to Western Mexico, it's a rare but regular visitor to the southwestern United States, but the bird was lost, and the 2 pieces of information that mattered were it's hanging out at a pond, and around the pond are fruiting palms. And so I said in my head, this bird is tired, it's lost, and it has food and it has water. It might stick around. And so this is the point in the adventure where like the addict in me couldn't say no. And I think that I knew that I was going to get to 600 species weeks before this. Just like the dominoes were falling at such an incredible rate that I could see 600 was well within it was almost a certainty, assuming that I completed my imagined route. But this is where like understanding the mind of an addict is important. And I went from saying like my goal is to get 600 species to my goal is to get every possible species. And when you're shooting for an unknown like that, you have to push yourself way harder. It's why batting in the bottom of the 9th inning in a baseball game is so strategically advantaged, because you know exactly how many runs that if you're behind, you have to get to tie or win the game. Whereas when you're batting in the top of the 9th inning, you don't know how many runs your opponent is going to score in the bottom, and you have to score as many as possible. And so I couldn't stop myself at this stage. And so I decided I would chase this bird what would amount to 300 miles. And the bird had to stay through 2 nights for me to have a crack at it. So when I left Brawley, which is where the red pin there is at the end of the blue line, I rode 110 miles to North Palm Springs on the first day. And then I got up that morning in the dark and I rode up about 3,000 vertical feet. And I got to 29 palms, and by 9:30 in the morning, the bird hadn't been seen by the 7 or 8 people that were there assembled. So I just fell into the collaborative search, and about, I don't know, 20 minutes into it, this bird flew out of a palm, and it flew into a palm, and I thought it looked like the robin, but I waited for about another 5 minutes and it popped out onto a branch, and it revealed itself as the Salt rufous-backed, which was like a huge relief given I'd biked 150 miles one way for it. And then I biked, I don't know, kind of back down towards Indio that night, and then back to Brawley the third night. So over those 3 days, I biked 304 miles and added one additional bird and hadn't moved an inch towards Texas, which is where I really needed to get in order to get to 600 species. But I then left the Salton Sea and biked Interstate 8 towards Tucson. The saguaro landscape was amazing to revisit that, but the novelty was kind of gone at this stage. I was now rejoining a route and individual roads that I had ridden earlier in the year. There were very, very few species possible for me as I moved back east across the desert Southwest. One bird I was able to get was a Sinaloa wren, which to this point in the year was it's an ABA code 5 bird, and to this point in the year was the rarest bird I had seen. It had occupied the same thicket for the month as I approached Arizona, so it wasn't a huge surprise. It wasn't anything self-found, but it was really cool to add another basically Western Mexican endemic in southeastern Arizona. The only other birds I expected to add in southeastern Arizona were Baird's sparrow and Sprague's pipit, both of which nest in the upper Midwest and then winter in small numbers in Arizona. So I was able to take both of those birds on my eastern return. And I thought the westbound transit of Texas was going to be the hardest part. This last month and a half, 2 months was the hardest part. Like my body was breaking down. As I just told you, the novelty was gone. I was riding over the same ground. The polar vortex, as it was dubbed the winter before, returned when I went through Las Cruces and Fort Hancock, Texas, which for trivia buffs is where Andy Dufresne crossed the border at the end of the Shawshank Redemption. It was 25 degrees. I'd sent all my warm stuff home. I was just freezing as I was going through Western Texas, but I kind of battled my way again on I-10 through Van Horn and Fort Stockton towards Sonora. And then once I was in Sonora, I broke from I-10 and turned south and headed down towards the Rio Grande Valley. And this is where the birding really heated up. As I fell off the Edwards Plateau to the south. Edwards Plateau is kind of like this limestone formation in north and kind of west central Texas. And that's where black-capped vireo and golden-cheeked warbler nest. But as you drop off of that geology to the south, you get more into mesquite, and like all of a sudden you hit green jay, you hit great kiskadee, you hit olive warbler, long-billed thrasher, green kingfisher. So the hits like started really coming back. Lots and lots of new birds. I was able to get white-collared seed eater and Laredo. I spent 2 weeks bouncing around the lower Rio Grande Valley trying to pick off what species remained. So it took a couple of days to find groove-billed ani, took a couple of days to find tropical parula, took a couple of days to get Aplomado falcon. Hook-billed kite was a bird I had conceded, and I was kind of sulking on the side of the road, sitting on my bike helmet on a dike, and I see this dark bird coming towards me. I'm like, oh, I haven't seen a crow down here. That's really unusual to see a crow. And the thing flew right over my head and then disappeared. And I was like, that was a hook-billed kite. Nobody's going to believe this. I didn't get a picture of it. And I got out my camera and the thing just spiraled. They called it thermal and just spiraled up above my head and allowed me to photograph it. So they've become a bit more common in the last decade in the valley, but it was still really rare at that stage. And I was able to get out of the King Ranch property and they helped me find Ferruginous pygmy owl. So I kind of cleaned up on all of the South Texas stuff. But this was the coup de grace. This was on Thanksgiving when I was birding with a couple of people at Estero Llano Grande, and this bird popped out, and a bunch of us got eyes on it. We're like, oh my God, we think that was a red-legged honeycreeper, but nobody got a photo of it. So we spent the whole afternoon trying to relocate it. It eventually did, and I took these photos, and once everybody weighed in and the ABA rubber stamped it, this ended up as the first ABA record of red-legged honeycreeper. So nobody else, as far as I know, has seen a first record ABA anything from a bike. So that was kind of cool. And then basically after I left the valley, I moved up the coast, picked up whooping crane, joined some of the Christmas bird counts up near Freeport. And I was able to get yellow rail there. I joined a yellow rail like census banding expedition one night as part of one of the counts. I got Harris's sparrow, which is another bird that wasn't around in Texas when I went west in the spring, but was back there in the winter when I went east. And I told you I missed Little Gull in the Northeast, but Little Gull showed up at White Rock Lake outside of Dallas. So I got that. And my last bird of the year was Smith's longspur. So at the time, that was species 615. I didn't count the Muscovies in Florida because I was hoping to get a wild one in Texas when I went through there, like in Salinino. When I didn't do that, I assigned Muscovy 616 at the end of the year. I saw Egyptian goose in Florida when I was there, and fortuitously, Egyptian goose was made ABA countable that year in 2014, so I could count that bird as 617. And once all the administration happened, I was able to count the honey creeper as 618. So that was my grand total. And so this was the map that I drew as a joke in planning this then still very hypothetical adventure on the left. And this is the route that I actually biked on the right. And you can see that it went almost exactly to plan. And one of the things I realized in taking the plunge to do this adventure is that if in fact there is one best route to ride, and if in fact I rode that route, then anybody else who comes along after me necessarily has this roadmap and this blueprint. And I don't want to say it's disingenuous, but it takes a lot of the fun out of it if somebody comes along and just like rides my route and sees X number of birds, right? So I realized there was a huge premium on being the first to do this, because unlike a normal big year where you wait for the phone to ring and you fly around, and the phone is it's gonna send you, the birds are gonna send you in a different order each year. Like I couldn't pick up the pen and move. Like I had to have one continuous trace. And so I think the trace I rode was about as good as you could do. I don't think that it would be easy. It would be possible to design a better route unless you were in significantly better shape than me and could reach into St. Louis to get, I don't know, what's it called? The sparrow, Eurasian tree sparrow. Going to Michigan for Kirtland's warble is a total waste of time. I probably could have gotten lesser prairie chicken if I pushed myself a bit harder, but you can't get them all. So by the numbers, I biked 17,830 miles. I kept track of walking here and there. So I walked about, I think I walked about 500 miles, or I counted for about 500 miles. I imagine it was probably closer to 800 or 1,000. I told you I saw 618 species, and I also raised $49,000 for bird conservation. I suffered 34 flat tires over the course of the year. Got really good at changing them as I went along. And one of the best things about riding a bike 50 miles every day for 365 days is you can eat whatever you want, whenever you want, and you're not going to gain any weight. If I woke up and I wanted 8 donuts for breakfast and a full pizza for lunch and 3 Whoppers and large fries and a pint of ice cream for dinner, I ate it. And I started the adventure at 188 pounds and I finished at 171. So it was total gluttony the entire time. And so birds are only one part of this adventure. The people that I met were like the absolute best. They were the people that I met helped me redefine like my perspectives on happiness and success. And I think that, like, with no disrespect to the other big years that have been done, I think the fact that I was on a bike let me interact with the American public in a way that normal big year birders don't get to. Like it's like walking the Appalachian Trail. You're self-selecting for other people who are interested in walking the Appalachian Trail. And so you're not getting like a representative picture of America. Like when I ate at Burger King every day, I've since gone vegetarian, but I was eating at like fast food restaurants every day. I got like to see like the American folk better than any other big year has seen them. And so it was really amazing to see just to meet so many different types of people around the country. Those 2 people there, Chris and Malia, helped me find red-throated pipit when I went through Half Moon Bay. And Chris and Malia are like my 2 best friends in the area now that I've moved near Half Moon Bay. So we go birding all the time. Chris and I were out looking for broad-winged hawk earlier this week. So the people that I met were amazing. The physical and mental challenges like cannot be overstated. There might be people who could do the birding. There might be people who could do the bike riding. But the actual hardest part of this were the logistics, trying to figure out where I needed to be when, what was the weather doing at any given moment, what was the weather going to do moving forward. And this is going to sound crazy. What did the weather do 3 days ago? Because if I'm riding a dirt road through rural Georgia and it rained 3 inches 3 days ago, that dirt road is a mud road. And the 50 miles that I have to ride on that road are going to feel like 100. So I needed to know, like, there were so many variables that I needed to think about that average big year birders did not need to. I couldn't, if I rode into town and the one motel or hotel in town was booked, and I got in there at 7 o'clock because it's sun setting, I don't have the option of getting back on the bike and riding the 70 miles to the next town. That's not an option. So I think that the fact that I came at this from an engineering mindset, because I'm effectively a genetic engineer, like my scientific background had me prepare for every eventuality at every moment. And I think that this is why I like to tell people that I run such good birding tours, because if I can navigate the continent on a bike for a year, navigating southeastern Arizona for 10 days in a van, piece of cake, not a problem. And so the sense of personal triumph that I experienced was unparalleled. Like I left a still promising career into which I had sunk my heart and soul for 16 years through these, honestly, the best institutions in the world. And like, it was a big blow to leave, but I was able to redefine myself through this. And so what this taught me is that crazy ideas are good ideas. I think that if you stand up in front of a room full of people and you pitch an idea and everybody in the room says, that's a really good idea, the idea sucks because the idea isn't challenging enough that it's forcing people to redefine how it is that they see whatever process or product it is that you're trying to better achieve or whatever. Like everybody told me that I was crazy, that this was a total waste of time, that this couldn't be done. And so the fact that I was able to execute on it really taught me that you have to think big. You have to get out of the box and try something totally different. And the only way to do that is to have people tell you that you're nuts. And so I didn't realize it at the time. Like this adventure really helped me kind of escape science and put my sobriety into not only into context but like into motion, because for that year I was addicted to biking and birding. And it gave me an outlet. I joke with people that when I was drinking, I beat the hell out of myself at night and recovered during the day. And on the bike, I was doing the exact opposite, where I was beating the hell out of myself during the day and recovering at night. But like I just realized that I can put myself, I can apply myself in so many different directions. And so I've kind of morphed into a bird photographer. I mean, I'm now an author with the publication of my book. I've done ecotourism consulting for a number of different governments around the world, most notably in Colombia, where I helped the Audubon Society with a monster project there. I'm working as a birding guide. As I don't know how, I can't see you, so I don't know how many of you are asleep, but I'm kind of making it a go as a public speaker, and I've done some travel writing as well. So it's just, it's opened up all these doors. And what I think I've realized that birding is my longest personal thread. I was a scientist for 16 years. I was an alcoholic addict for 13 years. I've been dating my wife, we were joking, dating slash married for 16 years, but birding is my longest personal thread. I mean, told you that I started birding at age 7 and I'm now 45. And granted, I didn't do much, if any, birding for the 13-year run of alcohol and drugs, but like effectively birding has been there either active or kind of comatose in the background the entire, like since I was 7 years old. That's 38 years. And I think that's pretty impressive. And who knows where it will take me in the future. Like working as a guide is a lot of fun, and being able to tell my story is a lot of fun. So with that, I will thank you for your attention. I think I was like right on an hour, so I think that's pretty good. My website is doriananderson.com. My email is pretty easy to remember. It's dorian.birds@gmail.com. If you're on Instagram, that's listed there. I work for Tropical Birding, and that's the book, Birding Under the Influence. If you haven't read it, please do. If you have read it, it's always helpful to get more reviews. Even if you just give it like a star review on Amazon, or a star review on Barnes and Noble, or a star review on Goodreads, like every time that one of those reviews hits, like it helps kind of bump the book back up in the sales algorithm and whatnot. If you feel like writing a few sentences, that's even more helpful, because the algorithm weights text reviews more heavily than just star reviews. So if you would be kind enough to do that, that'd be great. And at this stage, I will thank you for your time. Thank you for the invitation. I'm so stoked that I was able to kill two proverbial birds with one stone in talking with both of you. So thank you guys for working together to make this happen. And at this stage, I'll stop and take any questions you have. And nothing is off limits. You can ask me anything you want. I'm brutally honest in the book, and I'll be brutally honest with you now as well. So with that, I'll probably exit the screen here and let the moderators take over and figure out how we want to do questions. So thank you guys very much. There we go. Can you guys can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yes, I can hear you for sure. That was excellent. Very good job, Dorian.
Really good.
Wow. My wife read the book too, and
Excellent.
we both loved it. And anyway, I'm just so enthralled with having heard you and your story again, sort of beyond the book. I don't have any questions. I
Oh,
hope
it's good to
someone else
hear.
out there does.
Yeah, like I said, I'll field any of them.
Yeah.
I'm surprised I'm still standing given how far I rode earlier today. So I'm still feeling like relatively enthusiastic.
Good, good.
There are a number of chat comments saying, thank you so much. Awesome, truly inspirational, very inspiring story and photos. Thanks, Dorian. Thank you for your story. Continued success to you. So inspiring. Thank you so much. So that's pretty amazing. Everybody was rapt and interested and fascinated. So I think you've done a wonderful job sharing with us.
Well, thank you so much. Those comments are so much better than "you're a phony, get lost." So it's nice to hear that things are landing well, you know. So thank you all for those. That's really wonderful to hear those kind words.
There is one question I just saw. One was, were you injured when you were hit by the car?
No, I was actually not injured when I was hit by the car. I survived unscathed. I survived. I was almost hit on 5 or 6 different occasions. I was only hit once. I fell on ice a couple times. I had this very strange phenomenon where a rock got lodged, kicked up off of a path and lodged between my wheel and my fender and like stopped my wheel rotating and I went flying over the handlebars. So I should have been hurt, but somehow I wasn't. I think the same can be said for my drinking career. Like, I don't know how I survived what I did, like relatively physically. I had lots of minor injuries, but like nothing major. But yeah, I made it through the whole year without any significant injuries and kind of more interestingly, I made it through the whole year without getting sick. We know that exercise is a way to boost your immune system, but I didn't lose a riding day to sickness or injury the entire year. I lost days to sheer exhaustion, but I didn't lose anything to sickness or injury. So I don't think it would. I mean, that's why one people often ask, "Would you do this again?" And I say a resounding no. Not only because I don't think that I could. I don't think even knowing what I know now, I could beat 618 species. I just got so lucky. Uh, I also think that like my health wouldn't hold up as well. And honestly, if I want to do another cycling project, I'd rather ride internationally. I'd rather do something to use the bike to build international community. But hopefully, if I do that, I'll stay just as healthy as I did in 2014. So,
Dorian, can you are you still kind of connected with Alcoholics Anonymous, or was that something you no longer?
yeah, I have a really, I went to AA, like before I got sober, I had been to AA previously. Like I knew that I had an issue. And I think that first of all, let me say, AA is an awesome organization. I think that it does wonders in terms of helping people find a reason, find a support community and reasons to stay sober. My issue with AA was twofold. One, the higher power thing doesn't compute for me. Like that's just a non-starter. And also, more importantly, I think that I realized I was never going to be addicted to AA. And like the best and worst thing about me is that like I everything I do is at like 100 miles an hour and volume 11. And so AA was like this resented disruption. Like originally when I got sober, I went to AA, but I then kind of got addicted to my work, which caused other problems. But like the most natural way for me to stay sober was just like, I'm just going to stay at work. I'm just going to do all my work. Like AA just felt like this resented disruption. And so when I left AA after about 40 days, actually both times, like the first time I left AA and went back to drinking, but when I left AA the second time, I just decided that I don't need the structure of meetings and I don't need the community. What I need is I need to be allowed to be addicted to something else. And AA was never going to be that something else. It's going to be biking, it's going to be birding, it's going to be photography. So I have actually not been back to AA since the first 40 days of my sobriety. And on one hand, I'm proud that I can do it on my own. On the other hand, I wonder if people in AA might benefit from hearing my story. I wonder if I might benefit in ways that I might not see sitting here today if I were to re-engage with AA. So it's something that I've been thinking about, like what role, if any, would AA have in my sobriety moving forward? And I don't know the answer to that at this time.
Well, it sounds like you're doing pretty well without AA at this point.
So yeah, there's still days that I miss being high. I miss being drunk. I miss not worrying about whether the country is going to crumble after this next election. I miss not worrying about global warming. Like, when I was high and drunk at nightclubs, like I didn't think more than 4 beats into the future. And that was so liberating and freeing and at the same time irresponsible and dangerous. But I definitely, I miss being high and drunk still, but I realized that everything that I've created and built for myself and earned in being sober will go away if I get high and drunk. Like I'll lose my wife and I'll lose my career and I could lose my life and my health or my freedom if I started driving drunk again. So you don't get it both ways, it doesn't work that way. And so and I know that once I have the first beer, the 20th and the bag of cocaine is right behind. So as long as I stay away from that first beer, I'm okay. And I've been successful for that for 15 years. If Trump gets reelected, I don't know, but we'll see.
Yeah, yeah, I understand. Well, it was an inspiring program, and I'm just in awe. It was very good. So I really appreciate you doing this for us.
Yeah.
Really nice. Yeah.
I'm so stoked you guys coordinated this. Like it worked out well. And we moved. It was amazing that we were able to move it a night because of the vice presidential debate tomorrow. So like I'm so glad you guys are on top of that because with the 10 days between the Africa trips, I'm not on the top of anything right now. So thank you guys
pretty
for
impressive.
noticing that.
Everybody got back to me within like 10 minutes of
Awesome.
making that decision. It was amazing. Yeah.
So,
I don't know if there are more questions out there. I'll stop.
Yeah, if there's more, I'll answer more. I'll sit here
Well,
as long
there's one question that somebody wants to know more about your bike.
Okay. So I bought basically I did minimal reading, but I settled on the the Surly Disc Trucker. It's a steel frame touring bike that uses all generic parts. It has like bar shifters. There's none of these like integrated head shell brake shifters things. The rationale behind that being that if something breaks, it's really easy to get parts. It's really easy to fix. If you ride internationally, it's parts that you can get in Nicaragua or in Mozambique. So I liken it to it's the Honda Civic of bikes. Like it is it's not the flashiest thing, but every time you get on it, it's going to do exactly what you want it to do. I rode that bike 18,000 miles that year. I've since put another like 14,000 on it, bike birding in the Bay Area. So I put over 30,000 miles on that bike. It has suffered one broken spoke. It has suffered one broken shifter cable, which was both of those were on my big year. It's been, like I said, I told you, it's been hit by cars. It's fallen on ice. Like I had these adult temper tantrums when the wind was just like killing me at several points in the year where I like threw the bike off the road during the adventure. Like it just keeps ticking. It's indestructible. It's heavy, but once you put weight on it and you get it rolling, like it's just so good on the roads. It eats up the bumps. It's awesome. It's like I felt after 2014, I felt like it was like my fifth appendage. And even riding it today, like I told you, I rode over the Golden Gate Bridge today, and it just feels like part of my body even still, but it's super dependable. And having the disc brakes is really nice because when you have the like cantilever brakes that reach over the rim, when you're riding down these big mountain passes, what can happen is that the rim gets hot and your tube explodes in the tire as it expands. So that's why having these disc brakes is so much better, especially when you're coming down from these steep mountain passes and things. So yeah, the bike is awesome. I can't recommend it enough.
That's a pretty good advertisement.
I know. I need to get in touch with them and be like, look, jokers, I wrote about you guys in my book. How about you hook me up with some free stuff? So
another question was, what were some of your non-avian, like mammals, snakes, etc., highlights, if anything in particular happened?
yeah. So I think that the place that jumps out most to me is Jackson, Wyoming. When I went through there, I went there looking for great gray owl and ruffed grouse, black-backed woodpecker, and trumpeter swan, but I saw golden-mantled ground squirrel, and I saw porcupine, and I saw bears. I saw bear in Washington, but I saw moose and I saw elk. So Jackson was amazing that way. Trying to think, I had an episode in southeastern Arizona where I almost rode over a rattlesnake. I had been on dirt roads all day, and when you're riding what's effectively a road bike on dirt roads, you have to be looking at the ground, looking for rocks, ruts, holes, sticks, whatever. So I'd spent like 3 hours on dirt roads, and I finally got back onto the pavement. I'm like, yes, I can hear without the like grinding of the sand underneath my wheels, and I can look around so I don't have to look for holes. And I ride like 50 yards on the pavement, and all of a sudden I look down and I see this snake like lunging, this like 6 foot diamondback rattlesnake lunging at my foot. And I like almost had a heart attack. I swerved out of the way. I didn't want to hit the snake because snakes are so awesome. And then I like basically jumped off the bike, caught my breath, and then I was like, "Oh, the snake is still sitting there." So I got my camera out and actually took a bunch of pictures. I like laid down on the road and took a bunch of pictures of the snake coiled up, hissing at me from like 10 feet away. So that was like an unanticipated and literally heart stopping. Like I could not. It was like something I never imagined to see the snake like lunging at my foot as I ride by it. Fortunately, we both emerged unscathed. I will say that one thing I didn't do, which I kind of wish I did, was keep a list of all of the animals the dead animals I saw along the trajectory.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw like the Texas coast, like dead scarlet tanagers, dead yellow-throated warblers, dead semi-palmated sandpipers, dead long-eared owl. Like, I think my dead list, unfortunately, would be well over 100 species and closer to 150. I saw a lot of dead snakes.
Yeah.
That was the one depressing thing. It's like seeing the physical toll that cars take on wildlife. Like there's one area in Utah I went through that was just like rabbits and raccoons and foxes. It was so depressing. But it was a reminder that like I'm doing it the right way. It's really challenging, but I know that I'm not going to kill anything. I did have a turkey vulture fly into me. It was under a bush, and I scared it, and it flew out and like it flew like right into my front fork, and it was totally fine. But that was like the only contact I had with wildlife all year.
Hmm. There's one other question of a person's curious about why did you decide not to try catching the warblers, et cetera, in the Midwest, like Ohio and Indiana? And did you experience that same intensity of the spring songbird migration in another location?
Yeah. So the reason is that I had to go to Florida, right, in the winter. That is what the strategy prescribed, and I had to go to Arizona in the late spring, early summer. So the short answer is it's way easier to go to Texas than it is the upper Midwest. The other thing is that the upper Midwest is great birding, but there's nothing that you can see there that you can't see somewhere else. So like all of those warblers, and that's the other thing, like places like McGee Marsh, they miss some of the southern stuff. They don't get cerulean, they don't get Swainson's. I might have gotten Kirtlands had I gone up there, but the reality is that sticking to the coast was much more efficient than going to the upper Midwest. I had never been to McGee Marsh like prior to this trip, and I've been 3 times since with tropical birding. So I've experienced it, and it's a lot of fun. And I birded Taos Point up in Michigan as well. But it didn't make sense to go anywhere near the upper Midwest because the rewards in terms of new species were lower than staying in the areas that I did.
Well, that might come to about the end of our time. And again, it's just been so marvelous. I think everybody who's still on should try to unmute yourself and give him some applause.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's like the slow clap. It's like the slow clap at this stage, right?
Well, again, thank you so very much. It's really been quite an adventure to hear the story.
Stoked that I was able to do this. Hopefully you guys will, if the book is, when I talk, I'm kind of all over the place, like things, I just get really enthusiastic. The book is definitely like better organized, and so on and so forth. So if you like to talk, I guarantee you'll probably like the book better. And if you've already read it, as I said, reviews would be really appreciated. And if you have any questions about birding, tours, whatever, photography, please reach out. Like I said, I give my email there. So just Dorian.birds, whatever you want to talk about within reason. I'm there a couple of days before I go back to Africa, but I can answer any questions via email that you might have as well. And hopefully I'll be up in Oregon birding again there soon. My Oregon list is 253, so I kind of got to keep pushing it up.
Well, thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you if you come through. Let us know.
Excellent, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right. Good night.
Yep, cheers.
Good night.